bullying and students with developmental disabilities. I work with a group called the Educational Advocacy Project with SMIRLS. And we have a co-sponsor today for our training, and that's the Minnesota Governor's Council on Developmental Disabilities. So I'm just going to introduce myself really quickly until we get into the good stuff. I'm a staff attorney here with Southern Minnesota Regional Legal Services. My contact information is here. I have been an attorney since 2011 when I graduated law school. I was a prosecutor for a while, so I did a lot of juvenile delinquency and child protection cases. And I switched over to do education law because I had my littlest was in the hospital for 538 days. He is his own man. He was a micro preemie, and he has several diagnoses, including deaf-blind. On the spectrum, he's not fully deaf, he's not fully blind, but he's deaf-blind. He goes actually to the school in Faribault to learn sign language. But while we were in the hospital, I knew that I was going to have to do education law, and was kind of driven to learn about it that way. And then I saw that this job opening was Smurl, so I joined, and it's been one of the best decisions of my life. I love this job. So, and just a quick thank you to our co-sponsor. The links here, if you're interested in their resources, they have a lot of great programming and training through their own council. So this is a great resource for everyone here. Okay, SMIRLS, I mentioned that's the organization that houses my little team of education attorneys. SMIRLS is Southern Minnesota Regional Legal Services. We make it an acronym because that's a really long name. We've been open for 115 years. We serve Minnesotans with low income. This is our county map. So we do trainings in this area, but we reach out to other areas of the state to do trainings as well, and to make sure people know about education law and educational rights for children. Should you work or know people in this area, we are happy to take on cases. In order to be eligible, the family has to live or attend school in the service area. So we actually have some clients that live outside the service area, for example, Hennepin County, but the kids go to school in Ramsey. We'll take on those cases and work with those families. They have to be at a certain income limit, and then obviously we need to be able to help them with our educational services, which I'll get through in a second. SMIRLS also does other areas of law, family, housing, immigration. There's government benefits units, senior citizens unit. They have an economic justice department within our firm. And we have attorneys that are housed in medical facilities as well, because just to offer quick services, like for people that go to Children's Hospital, for example. So we are all around. And ELAP is we have our offices in St. Paul, but we serve all the counties. So the Educational Advocacy Project was started in 1995. The sole focus of this was to help families with low income enforce their educational rights. This was actually developed before the words or the phrase achievement gap was coined.
Laura, do you want to share your screen?
Oh, can you not see it?
No.
Oh, well, here, I'm just rattling off about maps and you guys can't see me. Hold on. Heaven's sakes. Okay, 1 second. Thank you everyone for turning in here. Okay, can you see that now?
Yes.
All right.
You might. You should.
I will show the map again here. So, okay, this is what I was talking about when no one could see what I was looking at. So, so this is our service area here, and it's kind of a unique hodgepodge of southern Minnesota counties, but we go all the way up to Washington and then the whole bottom part of the state there. Okay, so let's see. Okay, so I was talking about ELAP, and we started it back in 1995. The whole goal was to basically address the achievement gap. We know that children that are facing discrimination, are English learners, are basically most children that are low income or not white are struggling in school compared to middle class and upper middle class white peers, right? And so that's the whole thing, was to try to close that gap and have it so that low income or children facing disabilities, facing discrimination, experiencing homelessness, we're able to try to catch up to their counterparts, their middle class and upper middle class white peers. So we actually have some studies that came out there a little bit. I think they're like 2 years old, but it really talks about the achievement gap. In Minnesota, there's just some difficulties for students with different races, ethnicities, socioeconomic statuses to like match their peers, and we have the worst achievement gaps in the nation. I think there was one report that came out, we were 50 out of 50. We have some of the worst gaps with respect to college readiness exams as well. Okay, so ELAP is here just to give you a little background as to why we exist before we jump into the bullying stuff. We are trying to help families understand their educational rights. We try to address barriers and empower our parents. We're not always involved forever with these children, right? And an educational career starts from kindergarten through 12th grade, sometimes a little bit longer depending on the child. And so we want to make sure that the parents, the family, are aware of what we're doing and the decisions we're making so that they can continue to advocate for their child and that they are able to pick up, right, you know, when the next school year starts or however that looks if we're not involved. So we do some family outreach. We also, like this, trainings for other people. So you can always reach out to us to do trainings. And then we have individual representation as well. We don't just do trainings and legal advice. We actually take on cases and show up for court and, you know, meetings with the school and things like that. So the issues that we prioritize with ELAP is listed here. You look at these slides so you can read through everything if you want to later, but obviously bullying and harassment, we focus on discrimination, special education services. Some of these things are definitely intertwined too, right? It's not like just, you know, one thing is happening. Occasionally that is the case, but usually there's also multiple things that are going on with a family or the child at the school that we need to work on. And we try to help always as best we can with communication between the family and the school, however they're coming to us. So this is just some examples of things that we can help with. I put harassment and bullying first because that is what we're talking about today, but we can help do complaints on harassment or bullying. We can, you know, address discriminatory conduct in the schools, whether it's by staff or peers. We can work on suspensions, expulsions. I put in here constructive expulsions as well. And sometimes that looks a little bit different where maybe a child is essentially told they can't come back, but it's not been through like the proper, you know, statutory procedures on how they can't come back. It's just they're told that, and that's called a constructive expulsion. We can help kids that are learning English or their families and understanding their rights, changing placements, you know, dealing with transportation. Obviously, we help students with disabilities. So all of these are things that we can help with. Just know, I guess, if you have someone that's looking for services or even just some like tips on what to do next, we do anything on getting to the school, like transportation or in the school building. So it's not narrowed down to just a child with a disability or just, you know, academic performance. We'll do anything to try to help a family navigate the school system. So if someone does come to us and is looking for help, they have to go through an intake process to make sure they qualify within our service area and the income guidelines. After intake, we have them sign releases so we can go through the school records and see if that matches up with what the parent's saying. Not that it's anybody's misleading, but sometimes there's less documentation or more documentation or than what the parent knows about. And so we just need to kind of help guides us on what our next steps might be. Education law gets a little confusing too for people, and a lot of our parents are dealing with children with disabilities at home too, so they're juggling a lot, and to know exactly what's happening, we need to get those school records. We want to make sure we know what the family's objectives are, and we can advise them on their options, and depending on what they choose to do, then we can maintain on the case beyond just that advice piece, and we can negotiate with the school district, attend meetings, we can do mediations. If we're unable to resolve where we are trying to with the school, we can go to court because we're attorneys, and we can also file complaints with the Office of Human Rights, Civil Rights, or the Minnesota Department of Education, or some of the examples that we have here that we can get involved with administrative agencies to do investigations. Okay, so let's jump into our stuff. We're going to talk about bullying, harassment, and discrimination in school, some response options, and then I want to make sure we have time for questions at the end. All right, so bullying doesn't always look the same and it impacts students differently. I feel like that's a very obvious statement, but I want to put that out there first while we go through definitions and we go through examples. Everybody will need to take every single, the incidents or concerns that you have on certain bullying incidents, bullying encounters, to make sure that it actually matches with what that student needs, or what the family is looking for. So it's just because we have these options out there doesn't mean it's all going to work for in the same pathway, right? There's certain things that should be done in every bullying case or every discrimination case, but then after that, it might look a little bit different depending on student needs, student disabilities, what the parents are looking for, things like that. So just to kind of put that out there, that we'll talk about this broadly, but it will look different for every case, obviously, for families. Okay, so bullying is offensive behavior that is intimidating, threatening, abusive, or harmful. And then there's either a real or perceived imbalance of power, or it's sometimes or the behavior is interfering with the student's educational opportunity, performance, or ability to participate in school. So, if bullying is happening so often that the child is skipping math class or not wanting to go to lunch or, dropping out of the basketball team, right? Then that obviously would be an interference with their opportunity, or ability to participate in the school. Cyberbullying is done by technology, right? That's much more commonly talked about now. And a lot of kids have cell phones and are on social media, and that's, different ways that can be bullied. So that's a difficulty now that I know schools are dealing with, because it happens in the building, but then it carries on outside, right? And then actually the child never gets to really take a break from the bullying. So it's kind of incessant. But I also want to talk about discrimination, because some of this will blend from bullying into discrimination. So discrimination is when someone treats you differently or does not give you the rights you would normally have because of your race, age, sex, disability, right? Some other protected characteristic. And so Minnesota has the Human Rights Act, which makes it legal for someone to treat you differently based on things like disability, sexual orientation, religion. And so that there's a little helpful sheet here that's linked in here, so you can come back and reference that. I wanted to just put in here that criminal harassment can occur at school. This is a lot of statutory stuff, so it's linked in here. So you have the citation, you have the information. We're not going to go deep dive into criminal statutes today, but basically, if the bullying or your discrimination conduct is really I don't know, overwhelming, right? This is something where maybe we might want to look at, is it getting to a point of being criminally harassed? They're following, monitoring, or pursuing the person. They're making repeated text messages, right? They're trying to injure the person, making false, this is the thing about sexting, right? If they're using another person's information without consent, that type of thing can kind of lead into this criminal harassment. And it will happen under, if any of that above conduct happens and the victim is becoming fearful, right? Or causing substantial emotional distress, then it can rise to this level of criminal harassment. Now, again, tying to our discrimination piece, criminal harassment, if any of those things are happening and it's tied to a protected status, race, color, ethnicity, religion, gender, disability, whatever, then it can actually get in the criminal world, it can be more severe in the conduct and how they're looking at it. So, well, obviously, and we'll get to this too, but if it is really severe, that's where law enforcement would be involved. And I have some just notes on that too, but it's our hope is to address stuff early on and make sure that the school is safe before it gets to that level, of course. Okay, so I'm going to talk about how we're going to respond to bullying and what that looks like. So every school is required to have an anti-bullying policy in Minnesota. It must be published in the student handbook. So if a student is being bullied, it would be important for the caregiver, parent, guardian, whoever to check onto the school website for that handbook and get the bullying complaint form. It should be posted online. However, if it's not, you can always request a copy from the school. It's important to go through that handbook and see how the school district should be handling the complaints of bullying. And a bullying complaint form is an actual document. Like, it's not like just like it, I don't know, an idea. Like, it is should be like a form that should be filled out. Then of course, if the child is being bullied, the parent, guardian, or the child, of course, could always talk to a trusted staff member at the school. Schools must have a designated staff member to receive reports of bullying and to investigate them. If you talk to a trusted staff member and you go through the bullying book, or sorry, the bullying policy in your handbook, and you find out that that trusted staff member isn't the designated investigator, you can ask your staff person or your support person or whatever to join the meeting with the investigator that you'll need to set up. So you want to make sure you write up and file a bullying complaint on this on the school's bullying complaint form before the meeting. You want to save a copy for yourself. That's one of the key things that we'll want to pass along today is save everything, right? Save your documents. And if you make phone calls, follow up with emails to like recap your phone calls. So it's very helpful when you have to go back to things and try to remember what happened. When you meet with the investigator, you want to make sure you have the bullying complaint form with you. And it could be on your phone, but just to make sure that you have a copy with you so you can talk about what happened. And you might need to have more than one meeting to discuss next steps when you meet with the school staff about how this bullying's looking at, like what we're going to do. One thing that we do with Education Law Advocacy Project is that sometimes we will develop a safety plan to avoid bullying incidents in the future. So we'll go into safety plans in a few minutes here. But that is something that it's not always, but it can be helpful depending on the type of situation that's going on, so that everybody's on the same page as to what the safety plan should look like and who's doing what and who's taking responsibility for what pieces of the plan. Okay, so when we're talking about the safety plan with the school, you want to make sure that all the key players are there, right? The administrator that will be writing the plan, parent, it would, depending on the age of the child, you might want the child there, right? To make sure that they're well aware and that the safety plan would actually work for them. We're going to discuss possible action steps, list who's responsible for implementing each step. There needs to be a discussion between everybody about who's going to communicate with what's going on. If there's more bullying situations at school, who's going to tell the parent or caregiver? And how is that going to happen? If the parent knows about it and the school doesn't, how are they going to share the information, right? This can all be put together in the safety plan. How should the student report? In some schools, policies, they have it that it must be in writing, which is, that doesn't, and we'll get into this obviously with children with disabilities, but that doesn't work all the time, right? And so like, how does that look and what can we do to make sure that that's actually a plan that makes sense for who the student is and where they're at? If we're going to have a first grader write up a bullying report, like that might be difficult, right? We might need to have something else in place for that. And then, like, are we going to review this? How are we going to make sure the safety plan is working? Obviously checking in with the child would be great, right? But like, if they're very stressed out about it, or, there's a lot going on outside of the school issues, and maybe there's other things that are happening and they just are having trouble tracking, like there needs to be conversations with the adults to make sure everybody's following the plan and that it's working. So I added a resource down here that actually is from the Pennsylvania Department of Education that was really good. I thought would be helpful for folks. I also have an example of a safety plan, and I'm going to try to share it real quick if I can. It's not perfect, but it's something so at least you can see it. and kind of know what I'm talking about. Okay. I'm gonna share my screen. Ruben, will you let me know if you can see this?
Yes, I can see it.
Awesome. Okay. All right. So this is just an example. Okay. It might not be everything that you'd want in a safety plan, but it is like something just to maybe think about, and some good questions to have before you have a meeting with school about bullying. Okay. Obviously, like just some basic information. It's would be important to discuss a proposed end date and why and when and like what we're gonna do to make sure this stuff works, right? Um, it has here some requirements that are already implemented or part of the safety plan that you don't even have to add anything in. Like all school staff will be apprised of the safety plan and make an effort to implement it successfully. Any school staff who witness or otherwise aware of harassing, bullying behavior will intervene and immediately report the behavior. That's great. Like that's good and helpful information to have in the plan. Obviously there might be some questions about like how that looks and, you know, when it's going to happen and is there like a time frame and things like that for getting the information to the principal, but all of this is like that's good information to have. They have, you know, a teacher that will be designated as the student's primary point of contact. Which this is why if you, especially if you have, you know, an older child involved, you want to make sure that it's actually somebody that is their trusted adult, right? You don't want to just put somebody in there and then the, you know, the kid doesn't really like them or feel comfortable telling them stuff. So here's, you know, they're going to try to keep the kids separate if that's an option. Sometimes that's not. It just depends on like how, what's going on and, you know, what the investigation comes up with too. And maybe this is something that they put in place while the investigation's going on, and that would be the end date. As soon as the investigation's done, then we come back and review this. Classroom teachers will keep the student and the aggressor separate in the classroom during class activities. If it's really a bad situation, maybe depending on what's going on, the child needs to be in a separate classroom, right? It all just kind of depends. And some of the difficulty with this, dealing with the schools and talking about the safety plan, is that they also are under obligations to not always, they can't always share everything with you either, right? They have a lot of data practices, requirements that they have to follow, and they can't just be open and honest about everything that's happening, because then they would be sharing student data when they're not permitted to share that. So these might be just topics to have conversations about and figure out what can work to make sure everybody's safe and having a good educational experience. So they'll monitor passing times. In some instances, I know Ruben and I have had cases where we've maybe worked with parents to have the either we'll work with the school to have the aggressor or the victim of bullying have different passing times. And depending on where we are in the situation, you know, if we have a victim that's been bullied for a long time and has significant anxiety, having them have a passing time with not, you know, with hardly anybody else in the hallway, sometimes that's a nice thing too, right? Just to like reduce the amount of anxiety generally for the kid. But sometimes they also feel like they're the one being like identified as having an issue, right? And so it just kind of depends on the situation and where the student is at and what they're willing to do. That they're gonna like have certain people notified on the recess or, you know, available during recess. They have, you know, making sure that there's contact with the school counselor, to do check-ins, reporting it. It has here, this is kind of like a contract, which so it makes me a little nervous, right? That the student will immediately report any behaviors that, and so is that we, you know, is that possible? Can they immediately report anything? Sometimes, you know, if they're very stressed out about it and they just want to go home and digest the information and report it the next day, like, is this going to be something that like, you know, I don't think they'd get in trouble for it, but, you know, maybe immediately needs to be, you know, kind of fleshed out more during the conversation when you're setting this up with the student. They have this part in here that's included for the target student. So the one that's, you know, being the focal point of bullying. They're not going to have face-to-face contact online. They're going to identify friends that they feel safe with. They're going to check in with the counselor. They're going to, this is when I read this and I was like, well, I don't know if this would ever happen, but the student will share all passwords and will friend their parents on social media so that they can monitor for any adverse online experiences. well, some of this is really good in theory, but like, I don't know of a lot of middle school students that would be wanting to do this, but having that discussion about what that looks like, or if they're not willing to share the password, just being like, well, it's really important that you do at least, communicate with me when things are, with your trusted adult at the school, with the parent, however that looks, share that information as soon as you feel comfortable sharing it, because we need to respond to it. If it's really impacting their mental health, maybe that is something that is needed, right? And that the parents really need to enforce on the kid. It just depends on the situation. And then they have in here that if anything happens on campus or off campus, that there's going to be reporting it, which is good, right? That we want to make sure that, like, if there's any sort of buildup over the summer or Christmas break and then they come back, we don't want them to get in a fist fight the first day, right? Like, it would be nice for them to kind of be able to share that information at a time. Now, again, a lot of this depends on the situation, and the whole definition of bullying is a perceived imbalance of power, right? So this is going to be a lot of discussion and having, like, really truly support people there, and a student that is able to deal with this, and parents that are supportive too, right? Right. So there's a lot that goes into this, and just kind of having these plans are difficult to make, right? But I thought this would be helpful for the team to see here today, and kind of just look at what some schools do for developing those safety plans. Okay, so let's keep going here. Oops. Okay. Oops. Sorry. I'm sorry. My my computer has my words over my options here. Okay, there we go. Okay, so like I said before, the bullying complaint is a form, right? It's like not just like this. I should say, often schools see the bullying complaint as a complaint, like a formal written complaint on the form that they provide. So if that's what the school policy is that there should be a bullying complaint written on the bullying form, that make sure that that is done. If they're flexible and they accept things by email or whatever, just make sure that it is documented in some form in writing, so that people can come back to it and get the information that you have to share from the student, or if the student writes it for you, and sends it in, that's fine too. So again, more than one meeting might be necessary depending on the response. You might want to think about going up to talk to other people about your concerns about bullying. Again, keep copies of everything: text messages, social medias, photos, any other proof you might have. And then obviously keep copies of communication with staff too. So the school is supposed to follow their school policy and the Safe at School statutory requirements. If you go through the school policy and there's been, like, the school hasn't followed their own policy, or if the school doesn't follow the Safe and Supportive School statute, which we'll go through here in a second, you can report the school to the Department of Education, and they look at how they followed along with the school policy and the Safe at School statute. The Department of Education does not investigate if the bullying investigation was proper, right? So, like, if you're mad or the student is upset that the aggressor wasn't disciplined enough, or they didn't find that he did anything or whatever, that's not what the Department of Education does. They don't look at that. That's not within their realm. What they look at is, did they follow their policy? Did they do an investigation and try to get the information as best they could? Did they meet with you and discuss within the realms of data practices law what they could about the case, about the incidences and whatnot? So that type of stuff. So if if you have questions about that, the School Safety Technical Assistance Center has information down here. They are a great resource. They actually have a lot, if you contact them and just say like, this is what my concern is, they will actually give you a lot of resources that might be beneficial just on like kind of navigating the situation too. So it's a good resource. Okay, so the Minnesota Safe and Supportive School Act has a requirement that the school district and school policy has they have developmentally appropriate best practices to include preventative and remedial measures to defer or try to stop bullying, right? And so in this policy, the school needs to define roles and responsibility. They need to list different remedial responses. They have to include all this within the handbook, right? It has to be available in different languages. They have to share this all with, however they're developing whatever they're implementing for a research-based, developmentally appropriate best practice to try to like be preventative in bullying within the school. All of that needs to be shared within the student, parent, and the school communities, right? So everybody needs to have this information. So, and then they need to do trainings for school personnel to like try to prevent and identify and respond to this prohibited conduct. And anyway, so the statute kind of goes into a lot more detail here, which again, you'll get the slides here, but this is a really good way just so you know that the schools are trying to work on implementing and stopping bullying before it even starts. Now, if they're going to respond to bullying, this is where it comes back to the policy stuff that needs to be in place. They have to have a designated staff member as the primary contact in the school building to receive the reports. That person is also tasked with the requirement to ensure that policy and its procedures include restorative practices, consequences, sanctions, and that all of those consequences and sanctions are fairly and fully implemented. They're the primary contact on policy and procedure. They also, as part of the Safe and Supportive School Act, require that school employees who witness conduct make reasonable efforts to address and resolve that conduct. This section, this Prens 2, also provides that if the school employee possesses reliable information for them, that a reasonable person would believe a student is a target of prohibited conduct, right? So it's like, it's a little bit more like, if you know or you believe that a student is being targeted, not that you witness it, but if you like have some information that you would believe that they're being targeted, you're supposed to do something too, right? There's supposed to be a procedure on how an investigative reports of prohibited conduct will be done. That needs to be done within 3 days of getting that report. There is a requirement on how the school is going to respond, right? There's a presumption that the school district, as part of this response, that the school district will notify the parent of the target. They're supposed to notify the parent of the actor or the aggressor. All of this is slightly narrowed, of course, by the federal data practices law, right? So they can't share student data. Like, I mean, there's a lot of restrictions here, but they are supposed to share that there is a target, right? And kind of what's going on. The actor's supposed to be, or actor's parents are supposed to know. They're supposed to be providing remedial responses to this conduct and ensure that those responses are tailored to this incident, right? That it's age appropriate, behavioral appropriate, like that it's tied to like actually changing this conduct, not just some don't bully, whatever classes or whatever. It needs to be tailored. Okay. Safe and Supportive School Act also requires that there's no retaliation against anybody who reports conduct. They can allow anonymous reporting. So if someone comes up and was like, I saw so-and-so push this other kid, and it's a large high school and the teacher didn't know who the reporter was, that they can still accept that. They can't rely solely on it, right? They might need to go back and do interviews and look at the video and whatever, but that's like, they can accept anonymous reporting. So they are allowed to, or they're supposed to do training. And then I just wanted to just touch real quickly here, which we'll get into more, but where appropriate for a child with a disability to prevent or respond to prohibited conduct, allow that child's IEP or 504 plan to address skills and proficiencies that the child needs, or not engage, right? And we'll get into that in a little bit more detail here in a few minutes. So lastly, this is the last slide on the Safe and Supportive School Act. They are, the school district is required to have a professional development to build up the skills of all school personnel. And that includes, right? Look at all these people, right? Cafeteria workers, school nurses, custodians, bus drivers, athletic coaches. Like it's everybody, right? Not just our teachers or a social worker. Like it is people in the school that could be witness to bullying, discriminatory conduct, right? That are supposed to be aware of like how this policy works, how the policy is supposed to be implemented. So if a child is accused of being the aggressor or the actor in a bullying incident, they can present a defense, and parents need to be informed of their rights under state and federal data practices of like what they can have right to review. Now there is and I can share this with people if they do have questions afterwards, but there is a letter, I think it was by the US Department of Education, I believe. But it's about how parents or people that are trying to support advocate for children can go up and watch videos of school incidences, even if it has, obviously a lot of times it includes videos of other children, right? And so that's permissible. You can't necessarily get a copy of it, but you can go to the school building and look at that video and see what happened. Okay, so special education and responding to bullying. We just wanted to obviously bring this up because we're focusing on children with developmental disabilities or other disabilities. So if you have a special education plan, like an IEP or 504 plan, and the child is being bullied, Ruben and I, we've often asked for IEP meetings to try to add in supports for the child. 504 plans can also include these supports for the child. This can include having social worker time, right? And that was part of that safety plan too, right? Like that the child in that safety plan would have had social worker time once a day, once a week, whatever, just to kind of digest what's going on and maybe, you know, kind of process some of the bullying. Maybe we need to have the IEP have a change in the policy, because we can do that because it's an individualized education plan, right? It's supposed to be for the individual. So we can have an individualized education plan change the policy of accepting only written reports to accepting verbal reports, because maybe the child is dyslexic or has troubles writing or is, you know, in first grade, and that's like not possible, right? We need to have some verbal reports, and that would be acceptable, right? And so we can have that change in the IEP to make sure that however that looks, whatever it's going to be, that it's different from the policy and that everyone's aware of that change. If there's nonverbal children that are being bullied, like how are we going to, you know, make sure that that's happened? Are they, you know, going to make sure that the para is reporting for them? If the para is, you know, like a 2-on-1 and maybe they can't spend all the time with the child or something, you know, like what is going on in the situation. I guess I would just make sure that you would want to know how they can share that information. If it's going to be through their tablet, you know, maybe they have a you know, a talking device, or if they can write it down, but they need to be obviously supported. And we know that, you know, children with disabilities are bullied because of their disabilities. So we just want to make sure that however that looks for that child, that is added to the IEP, because then you can have it implemented, right? And the team will have to support it and make sure that it's working for the child. And you can come back and look at it and be like, is this working or not? So a few questions to ask yourself before this meeting is, how does the victim respond to bullying? Does the victim shut down? Do they run away? Do we have an elopement issue? Is the victim hitting them, right? Like maybe they're responding, you know, aggressively towards the bully when the bully is, you know, using mean remarks or whatever, right? So make sure before you have your IEP meeting, and it can change, of course, right? But make sure before your IEP meeting that you're like getting from the school how the target of the bullying is responding. And it can change, right? If once it builds up to so much, maybe they'll start getting aggressive, whereas right now they're just sad, right? It depends, but that is something that you'll want to make sure that you are gathering before your meeting and then continually being aware of. What supports and accommodations would help the victim of bullying? And that can look different for every kid, right? If we have a nonverbal child versus a very verbal child, but runs away, is an elopement, does an elopement thing, right? So what do we need to do supports and accommodations for the child? And then on the flip side, especially if we're getting to middle school and high school, what supports and accommodations would the victim actually use, right? So if we have, oh, we're going to do passing time at a different time, but that's like when they socialize and they don't want to, miss their friends. Like that's something that we don't want to change, right? We want to make sure, one, that the victim's not feeling more victimized because of the situation, but two, if they're not going to use it, then we don't want to put it in the IEP for it just to fail. We need to figure out what we can do to support the child and that they will actually use it, particularly when they get to, it's easier to tell a first grader what to do versus, a 12th grader, right? So I just kind of have in mind like what's that actually going to look like. And I put in here to consider developing a safety plan with the IEP team or the 504 plan team, having that safety plan. And I wouldn't put it as a separate plan, but maybe go through those same questions or similar questions or questions that you think are relevant for you and making sure that that's implemented into your IEP, right? You want, versus having so many documents for one child, right? If you're adding accommodation supports, modifications for your child that's being bullied into an IEP, the safety plan should also be in that same document, right? So it should all match up versus having multiple plans, an IEP plan and a safety plan and health plan or whatever. Like that's too much. You want to have it all in one document and all the supports there to show, how it's going to be implemented, how communication is going to happen, who's responsible for what, that type of stuff. So, and making sure that the IEP then, if it does include your safety plan, that it's shared with the proper people, because your IEP team is a narrow group of people, but maybe the one-page safety plan that's put together needs to be shared with, the athletic director or whoever, right? We have more communication of that plan and what it looks like. Okay. If your student is considered the bully or the aggressor, or sometimes students are picking on each other, right? It's more of a mutual issue. Still having that meeting with the IEP team or 504 plan team could be a great way to discuss additional supports, services. The behavior modification section, the positive behavior intervention plan, that's usually at the end of an IEP, really focuses on replacement behaviors, right? So if you have a student that's really struggling with peer relationships and their peer relationship struggles are coming off as bullying, working on replacing those negative comments or aggressive actions with something else that would fit perfectly within a positive behavior intervention plan. So just looking at it in a lens of trying to get the accommodations and supports in place for the aggressor or for the target, either one in an IEP, really would help support the student, because one, you get to rely on an IEP and making sure that it's like actually followed through and come back and meet with the team to make changes. And depending too on like if it really is a peer relationship struggle and your student's aggressor, maybe having a goal even in the IEP with a plan of having them build more positive peer relationships and tracking that data and encouraging them to have, maybe better boundaries or less aggression or, whatever it might look like, right? And then that would be a helpful tool too to see how they're progressing. So I had a young man when I first started over with Smurls here. He had peer relationship issues, and it didn't really come across as bullying all the time because it was usually mutual. Like he would lip off to somebody and they'd get mad and yell back at him or whatever. But it was really critical because we didn't want him to get in trouble for like, that was his that's kind of how his disability was coming out, right? Was this peer relationship. And so we worked on having the positive behavior support plan implemented that really worked on supporting him on changing out his, kind of aggressive or, yelling verbal behaviors to trying to make them, like maybe we just need to take a time out or have some space, or like, is there like a sensory area that we can go to, so that we're trying to replace his aggression, which is, you know, obviously causing some stress in the school, to have, having him have supports in other ways. So, and we don't want him to get disciplined for getting in a fight. We want to make sure that he has that supports, especially in a lot of these cases, it's tied to disability. So, okay. So I just noted here the IEP documents must be followed by a school district. If an IEP team refuses to change the IEP in order to offer additional supports, they must share the rejection and reasons for the rejection. And it's a document called a prior written notice. It's a PWN. If they send you the prior written notice, rejecting your request to add different supports, you can actually object to their rejection and then you can have another meeting with the team just to sit down and talk again. So just make sure that if you do bring this up with the IEP team and they're like, no, we can't add this, or we don't have support for that, or whatever, they need to tell you why they're rejecting it and actually write a separate document so that you know that they're rejecting it, and then you can ask for another meeting. If you have an IEP that's supposed to have peer supports, or maybe they're supposed to do like friendship classes or social skills classes to help them have better peer relationships, and those things aren't being followed, you can contact the Department of Education and ask for them to look into the special education plan, and that if it's not being followed, they can look into that and figure out what that looks like. So that links are all down here for that. So we always encourage you to talk to the team, though, of course, right? To try to get it sorted out, because oftentimes they can, if there's a hiccup or a miscommunication, we can get that done at a meeting. That's a lot faster than waiting for, the Department of Education to do an investigation, because that takes a lot of time, and kids' times in school is really short, right? So the better communication you have with an IEP team, the better. So, okay. So just quickly noting on responding to bullying when it turns into harassment. Doing safety plans is helpful. If we're getting like significant harassment, criminal harassment, contacting law enforcement can be an option, right? Some of these schools have school resource officers, or you can call the local deputies. You could file a harassment restraining order. Filing of a harassment restraining order is a tool that will help keep one student away from another student. It's not perfect, but it is something that can be used. And then I just put a note in here that the domestic violence advocacy organizations, a lot of them work with students that are being bullied, and they can also help you file HROs, or the harassment restraining orders. So if this is a situation that's rising to a significant level and it's really causing some like emotional harm on the student, having a conversation with the local domestic violence advocacy about what their resources are, if they have bullying support groups, or maybe they want to consider help, going over the information to see if an HRO might be appropriate. That type of stuff would be great. It's a great resource for people. Okay, and then here's just some more links for bullying. Okay, I want to just do discrimination. I'm going a little slow here. I need to speed up. So responding to discrimination. So again, discrimination is like tied to a protected status, right? So if the one thing I wanted to say, I guess, on here, and a lot of this is similar to the bullying thing, is like review the handbook, document, save your evidence, report your concerns, and then follow up with writing. But the most thing I guess I'd point out about is discrimination is that it can also come from school or school administration. So I know Ruben had a case this last year. The staff actually got fired because of discrimination, in the special education setting, I believe. And so it can look different because it's the more people can do it, right? It's not just bullying by peers. So if there is a concern about discrimination, you can report it. There's a couple of different agencies that will take reports on discrimination. So the Department of Human Rights, they you have to file within 1 year. They have a really easy form for people to fill out. And I actually plugged in the link here. It's a long link, but it's just on discrimination in schools. So you can look at that one if you want. But you know, if you're concerned about your child being discriminated based on disability, race, if they're an English learner, you know, whatever your concerns are, they have a, you know, great intake, you know, form to be entered in, and then you can just send in your concerns and they'll call you and set up a meeting. Department of Education will also review complaints of educational concerns. It's not like they look at discrimination, but sometimes there's overlap, right? So if you have, maybe the discrimination is that the child is, you know, being picked on because of, you know, their disability, right? And they have an IEP. So maybe you might do a human rights complaint and a special education complaint. And what that human rights one obviously would go to the Minnesota Department of Human Rights. A special education complaint might go to the department, or would go to the Department of Education. So there's, depending on what's happening, the Department of Education can also look into things that, you know, it depends on the situation, but they can look into, you know, teacher licenses, if there's maltreatment, neglect, you know, things like that. So, and then I want to highlight the Office of Civil Rights. That's housed within the U.S. Department of Education. You can report discrimination to them. That has to be within 6 months of the Discrimination Act. And the OCR, or the Office of Civil Rights, actually investigates a couple different things. So they'll investigate 504 plan violations, or 504, like if it's a disability violation. Similarly, the Americans with Disabilities Act, they'll investigate. Title IX, which is discrimination based on sex or sexual orientation. I've actually I have 2 Title IX cases being investigated right now, and they're, the OCR is a great resource, but they do take a little bit longer because it's nationwide versus just statewide. So their investigations are a little bit slower, but they do take on those cases. Civil Rights Act investigations as well, and that'd be race, color, and national origin. So their application is a little bit more difficult to complete compared to the office, the Minnesota Department of Human Rights. Okay, that was a lot. So what questions do you have? I'm going to stop sharing real quick. And then is there something in the chat? Okay, so we have one question in here. Can I send the PowerPoint by Zoom? Yes, 100%. I will send out the PowerPoint on our email chain here. And then, do these laws pertain to Montessori schools? So these laws go to public schools. Charter schools are considered public schools. I'm assuming, unless you're paying for a private school, your Montessori school would be considered a public school as well, because I think it would probably add like similar to like a charter school. I know there's a couple of Montessori schools that I had some clients that were looking at, and they were set up like charter schools. So it's not like a school district, like the St. Paul School District, or, you know, the Rochester School District. It's like a school district inside of the school district, because it's just that little charter school that will take in whoever. And so Montessori schools, my experience, have often been set up like those charter schools. And so, yes, public schools, which would include that, have to follow these laws.
You should also look at the district policies to see
Mhm.
if the handbook has information on bullying as well.
Okay, so we got a question here. What are the legal consequences in Minnesota if the victims respond to bullying with aggressions to defend themselves? Oh, it can be, it's a little bit of a mess. So there are, it can range, right? So I think it's often, in my experience, it depends on how well the bullying has been documented, right? So if there has been a lot of documentation about the bullying, they might not, have as many consequences. But if there's not been a lot of documentation about the bullying and they respond aggressively, the victims could potentially get suspended, possibly expelled. They could get charged with assault in juvenile court. they, there is a new law, this came out in 2023, where the victim, or if you are like improperly suspended in your view, right? You're improperly suspended from school, that you can submit a inquiry. It's to the school district, but to the school district, inquire about your suspension, right? So if you're like, I've been bullied this whole time, there's a ton of documentation, here's all the text messages, I just couldn't handle it anymore and I lashed out, I shouldn't have been suspended because the guy wouldn't stop, that you could basically send in that like kind of complaint to say like, I was improperly suspended, here's why, and then, but it's difficult, right? Because you need to have that everything documented, and it's hard for kids to come up and, why would, often if things are hard in school, they don't want to make them harder for themselves, right? And have all these changes and people involved in their lives. But, if it goes on for a long time, we can really see a lot of mental health impacts on the kids, a lot of anxiety, they don't want to be in school, which is, that's too sad. So, okay, we have, okay, so for a child with terminated parental rights and no special education services, who advocates for them with bullying? So, that's a good question. There are people called surrogate that can be appointed by the school, or if you're in court, you can ask like, the judge to like, depending on who your judge is and how the language is written in the orders, they can try to advocate for the child that's being bullied. I've seen, when I did child protection, I've seen a lot of orders where the judge gives like the county the right to advocate, even though technically that's like not, I don't think that quite follows the law perfectly. So yeah, so there's a thing called surrogate advocates or surrogate parents. And so if you have like a grandparent that's willing to come up and advocate for them, but they just can't adopt them, right? Like if they're in that word of the state limbo, having that person, they could still step in, or you could ask for, the school should be able to identify someone to be a surrogate too, which I don't know who they would find for you necessarily, but I can send you more information if you email me about that question. I can send you resources on that. And then there was another question: is there an agency outside of Minnesota for services? It depends on what you're looking for. There's the Minnesota Disability Law Center, and they, in Minnesota, they do education law. I think they're trying to expand, like the amount of services that they do, but my understanding is that they do a lot of like advice, like detailed, like hour-long advice for people, because they represent the whole state, for kids with disabilities. So there's that. There's ARC, ARC, and they, but I believe they also work with children with disabilities. So PACER in Minnesota, PACER, has a bullying group too that's nationwide. I don't know if they have advocates so much as resources, but that would be, I know I connected with them before, I think it was like maybe a year and a half ago, and they have great resources. I mean, they have even templates, that's on one of the slides. They have templates on how to like submit a bullying letter to the school, like that you could take from their national webpage for PACER. But I don't know if they have someone that will go to the school and advocate for the kid. It kind of, I think it depends on where you're located and everything. Oh yeah, so okay, yeah, you're a surrogate, yes. Oh, okay, I'll put in the PACER information here to see. I think it's .com. And then, does anybody else have any questions? Or
I'm gonna stop recording now, Laura.
what's that?
I'm gonna stop recording, just so you know.
Oh, okay.